Hello everybody, thank you for joining us this evening to learn more about the rating review. I'm Donna Harvey, Group Manager for Corporate Services, and I'm here with Peter Bridgewater, who is our Chief Financial Officer, and Amy Bedwell, who is our Acting Communications Team Leader. We'll begin with a brief 15-minute presentation, followed by a Q&A session. This session will last around about an hour or until we've answered all of your questions. You're welcome to submit questions during the presentation using the Q&A button at the top of your screen. Simply click the button and type your question and we'll address them after the presentation. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded and will be posted online for those who are unable to watch it live. So let's get started. So today, or this evening, we'll be just running through an overview of rates and this rating review. We'll be looking at the two proposals that are currently out for consultation, and we will provide some information on how to find more information and have your say. We'll start with a history. It's just a very quick history of this rating review. As you can see, Council have been discussing rating review for quite a bit of time. And the merits have been debated over a number of years. We've had some advice in 2023 also on how to conduct an effective rating review, and in the 24-34 LTP, Council provided some funding for us to proceed with this rates review. So just briefly, for those of you online that are not sure about how rates are set, rates are actually a tax on the value of property, and they're made up of a part uniform or fixed charges for the property and part as a rate in the dollar based on the value of the property. The value of the property is determined by triennial revaluations, and these valuations represent a means of distributing the rate burden across the district. Currently, our rates are mostly based on land value, and Council's current rating tools or rating framework includes general rates, uniform annual general charge, which you'll often hear referred to as UAGC, and a number of targeted rates. How much each ratepayer pays depends on a number of things, one being the valuation of the property, the number of separate parts on a property, such as multiple dwellings, the services that are available, and whether the property is connected to those services. For example, water, wastewater, and rubbish and recycling, curbside collections. Eligibility for rates relief or emissions are also included in what each ratepayer can pay. Rates are set each year based on the rating requirement determined through a long-term plan or an annual plan through our budgeting process. And the rating funding impact statement is the critical document that determines how rates will be paid and who will pay. Council adopts the rates resolution usually at the same time as the meeting for the annual plan and after adoption of that long-term plan or the annual plan. The rating funding impact statement and the rates resolution must contain the same information. Once Council has adopted the rates resolution, staff can then set the rates for the new financial year. The Council's current rating tools used that are described in the funding and rating mechanisms, which is a section in our long-term plan. If anybody's interested in having a look, that's on page 254 to 259. Right, what is a rating review, you may ask? Well, a rating review is a review of the allocation of rates and what share of the rates each ratepayer should pay. A rating review, what it's not about is about how much will be collected in rates. Rather, it's a process for elected members along with the community to decide on what is reasonable and appropriate allocation of rates. Essentially, it's about whether and how the rates pie could be sliced differently. A rating review will not reduce the amount of rates paid overall The amount of rates income that's required is a result of budget processes developed through a long-term or annual plan. A rating review will also not resolve the problem or issue that we often hear that rates are too high. This can only be solved by spending less or increasing revenues other than rates. Decisions made as a consequence of a rating review must comply with the rating and decision-making laws. This review is driven by three major themes that were identified in our financial strategy, which are to keep rates affordable, fair, and equitable. Throughout the 4 months from November to February, Council considered several scenarios. These scenarios were modelled and the incidents of change, benefits and disbenefits were debated in the various workshops. 3 of the scenarios modelled, while considered as part of the review, ultimately did not deliver on the overarching principles of this review, so they've not been included or proposed for consultation. So now I'll move on to talk about the proposals. There are 2 proposals in our proposal document. One is rethinking our rates, and the other one is rethinking our approach to second dwellings. In each of these 2 proposals, there are 3 options. I'll now hand you over to Peter, who is going to run you through rethinking our rates.
Kia ora. Thank you, Donna, and welcome everyone. So the rethinking our rates is looking at the basis on which council sets rates. So that's at the moment for 2 of our larger rates, that's the general rate and the local works and services. Those are currently set on land value. So under this proposal, there are 3 options, which you can see in front of you. Option 1 is obviously the status quo, so maintaining land value as the basis of those rates, which would result in no change to the rating system. Option 2 is moving for those rates which are set on land value to capital value. So that's the rate and the dollar component of these rates, which is the general rate and I guess the variable portion of the local works and services rate. The local works and services rate also has a fixed or uniform component to it. There are also, there's as part of this and also a proposal to change the UAGC to a fixed percentage of the general rate. At the moment, it funds specific activities, which can make it difficult to work with from an administrative perspective. Option 3 is the same as option 2, plus includes some changes to the solid waste, that's the rubbish and recycling rates, and the current district transportation, which is roading, and building control activities rate. So this proposal includes splitting the current rubbish and recycling targeted rate into 2 rates, one which would cover the current rate, which is the curbside collection, and one which would cover the cost of the transfer stations. The rubbish and recycling rate to fund the transfer stations is proposed to be a district-wide rate. The changes to the district transportation and building control targeted rate is proposed to split the 2 so that the district transportation rate just funds the district transportation activity, and for the rate funding for the building control activity to be picked up by the general rate. Could we go to the next slide, please, Donna? So the incidence of change is quite variable for each property. So if you go to Council's website, in the rating review section, there is a lot of information which I'd encourage you to have a look at. There's also what we've called the fair share calculator, where you can go and have a look at any specific properties that you're interested in to see what the incidence of change is under option 2 and 3. This will primarily give you the information around the move from land value to capital value. as you can see there, it's approximately a third or thereabouts that see each change. So 9,300 properties will see an increase. About 8,600 will stay the same. That's plus or minus 2%. And just shy of 11,000 will see a decrease. Under option 3, which are those further changes, the way that the building control and district transportation targeted rate is currently levied on capital value already. So moving that between the targeted rate and the general rate under a capital value system won't change the incidence of that rate. The purpose of this change is really to increase transparency around how that roading activity is funded, and so that the district transportation line that you see on your rates invoice is the full amount that you pay for roading in the district. The changes to the rubbish and recycling activity will have a relatively minor change for properties which currently receive the curbside collection and currently pay that targeted rate. So we have the example of Thames here, but if you go to the calculator, you'll be able to see the impact on your specific property. So for Thames, we see the current rate for both the curbside collection and the transfer stations is about $363. With the proposed change, the two rates combined will total to about $361. Those who don't currently receive that collection will be seeing an increase of about $190 to pick up the costs of those transfer stations that they are not currently paying. Could we go next, please, Donna? So here's just some general information which you can see in the proposal document. It's included about page 10, which shows the total percentage movement under option 2. So this is just showing the incidence of change from moving from a land value basis to a capital value basis. So you can see a very large number of the district is captured right in those middle 4 bars, that plus or minus 4%, and we'll see, effectively very little change from the proposal. There are other properties which will see a much more substantial shift, both up or downwards. So I'd encourage you to check out your property. What drives this change is the relative capital value to land value. So across the district, we have an average ratio of about 2 to 3. So if your capital value is 150% of your land value, you're right on the district average and will see effectively no change. If your capital value is higher than that, you will see an increase. If it's lower than that, you will see a decrease. If we could go next, please, Donna. So one of the big questions that we got asked early on in the process by elected members is, will this shift the incidence of rates between wards? And it's, when we look at it and do the modelling, it's quite clearly not. So there was a perception early on that the eastern communities would be picking up more of the rates under a capital value system than a land value system. That is not the case. Could we go next, please? And so this really shows exactly what it does to those rates. So the Coromandel, we see a very minor decrease. Mercury Bay is slightly larger. Again, none of these shifts are overly substantial. Tairopānui, a minor increase. Thames, a slightly bigger increase. And Whangamata, a slight decrease. So that shift is really because across the district we don't have a substantial difference in the level of capitalisation on a property. So most properties will fall within a range around that 50% capital value to land value, and those high value properties where there are quite substantial houses or other dwellings on them, they have similarly high land values already, so they are already paying more substantial rates under a land value system. And so that's why we don't see this huge shift between wards. If you go next, please. So that takes us on to the second proposal within the proposal document, and I'll hand back to Donna to talk through this one. Just unmute yourself there, Donna.
Thanks for that reminder, Peter. So this one is about rethinking the approach to second dwellings. And again, with this proposal, there's three options. Option one is the status quo. So there's no change. There'll be no change to the current policy. Option two would require a change to our SUIP policy. And the change that's proposed is that changing our SUIP policy so that SUIPs will only be applied to rating units that have 3 or more SUIPs. Currently, it's applied to 2 or more. So what that change would mean is that properties that had 2 dwellings or 2 habitable units on their property would only pay for 1 SUIP, where they currently pay for 2. So that would, as I've said, that would require a change in policy, and it would also require a change in our rates remission policy, because basically at the moment we have a rates remission policy that gives a relief to properties or rating units with 2 habitable units that are only used for family and friends. Therefore, they're not rented out for a monetary gain. People can apply for a full 100% remission currently on that second SUIP under the policy. So if this option two was a policy that council adopted, there would be no requirement to have that 2 habitable unit rates remission policy. And option three is it would change to that rates remission policy. So currently, under that policy, there's some criteria that must be met, and one of those is in regards to minor dwellings. So that's properties that are generally under 50 square metres, or whose second dwellings are under 60 square metres. So think about things like, I guess, like a granny flat or some very small unit in there. So currently, those dwellings or those rating units, they get an automatic 50% remission on that second SUIP. So the proposal for this one is that would change to 100%. So with the incidence of change of these two options, with option two, there's approximately about 500 properties that would experience a reduction in their rates. The total cost of that is around about 1.7 million. And conversely, all other properties in the district will experience an increase in their rates. And the reductions and increases, they will vary depending on where the property is situated and services available. So, for example, a property in Coromandel with 2 SUIPs that has all council services will experience a decrease in rates of approximately $3,000, while other properties in Coromandel with all those services will experience an increase in rates of approximately $80. Another ward example is a property in Pauanui with all the council services. They'd experience a decrease in rates of approximately $3,600, while other properties in Pauanui with all those services will have an increase of approximately $65. With option three, currently there's approximately 74 properties who already receive a 50% remission for their second dwelling, and they will see a reduction in their rates overall, of around about $127,000 across those 74 properties. And conversely, all other properties in the district will see some increase. However, it'll be very, very small, probably, a 2, 3, a few dollars. And again, the reductions and increases will vary depending on where the property is and the number of services that that are available to that property. So, for example, a property in the Whitianga ward, where their second dwelling meets the criteria of a minor dwelling, they will experience an additional reduction in rates of about $1,700. How to find out more information. So you can go onto our council website and have a look under the How to Have Your Say section and click on the rating review, and you'll find our proposal document there, which has all the information and in a lot more detail than what we've discussed tonight. There's also our fair value or fair share rather calculator that enables you to put your address in or any address in our district, and it will bring up the options, the 3 options that are being proposed, and it will show you basically if the rates were set on this current year's rating requirement. It will give you an idea of what the movement would be for you for that property. We've got one more community session left, and that is in Coromandel on Wednesday, the 30th. And you can, and we've also got a rating review email address that I think, Amy, you're going to put that in the chat for us or for people to have a look. So if they've got any questions after tonight, you can go in and put your questions there, and we'll have a look at it and get back to you. Oh, and here's about how to provide your feedback. There is the online survey, so you can provide it directly online by filling out the online form, or there is a downloadable form in there if you prefer that to complete and then email to us. Questions?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Donna and Peter. That was wonderful. We have had a few questions in the Q&A. So we'll start off with the first to come through, and that was, is there any way to know what the impacts are on the impacts of holiday homes or second dwellings is having on the rates of those who reside here full time?
That's quite a big question. So I guess it depends. There's various ways of looking at it. So we do, everybody, like whether people reside here full time or whether they reside here or on holiday homes, depending on the value of their property, they will all be paying a share towards the rates. As far as as far as the impact, probably this isn't probably the right forum to talk about that, but there's varying situations about the impact. I mean, yes, over that period, that busy period when we get a big influx of people, not necessarily just people that have holiday homes here, but all tourists, that there is an impact on our systems, especially on our water and wastewater systems and our rubbish and recycling systems, which they have. We have got provided infrastructure to be able to cope with those busy times.
Awesome, thank you, Donna. Next question is a great one. It's, how do you calculate a targeted rate for district transportation?
Cool. I can pick that one up. So targeted rates can be targeted on a whole lot of different or in a whole lot of different ways. So when we're talking targeted rate for district transportation, it's just the funding or the activity that funds is targeted to just district transportation. So it is a district-wide rate that is levied on capital value. So in that sense, it's mechanically not too different to the general rate under a capital value system. It's just that the funding from that rate is only used for district transportation.
Yeah, and just to be clear for people that aren't sure, district transportation just as funds of our roading activity, our district roading activity.
Wonderful, thank you both. The next question is, I'm assuming that having a rubbish rate will mean the end of the $8 bin tag. Do we have any comments on that one?
I can answer that one. So in short, no, it won't. The $8 bin tag only pays partially towards the costs of having a curbside collection. Rates funding also pays towards that. So the curbside collection pays for obviously the pickups and the collection of that, but the biggest cost is actually the disposal of rubbish and recycling. And so whilst the $8 bin tag pays some ways towards that cost, it doesn't pay the full cost of the disposal of the rubbish and the recycling. So that currently is what is paid for by the rubbish and recycling targeted rate. And so that will continue. It's the change that is being proposed is to take the cost of running the transfer stations out of that targeted rate. So that will be funded separately so that everybody in the district pays for that rate rather than just those receiving curbside collection.
Awesome, thank you, Donna. And from the same community member, there was a question, is a sleep out on a property considered a second dwelling?
So there are specific criteria. There is specific criteria that that constitutes a second dwelling, and that is basically set in our district plan and in our consenting process. So there's certain criteria, and I think it's about having a sink, but an operable sink, and that. So if it was just a sleep out with nothing in it other than just somewhere to sleep, that doesn't constitute a second dwelling.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. The next question, will the change have a bigger impact on the eastern parts of Coromandel? And will that be a positive or negative impact?
So this one may have been asked before we got to that slide, but just going back to the slide of the different wards and the impact on each ward. So we did not see what we would consider a significant impact on any ward, but the eastern parts of the Coromandel, if anything, saw a slight decrease in total rates collected from those areas.
Yeah, sorry, I think I had marked something up with that, so you may not have been able to see that. Is that clear? Is that slide back available for people to see now?
Not yet.
Okay, I shall. Oh, hang on. Sorry.
That's okay. Awesome.
There it is. It's back. Sorry, I must have clicked something that made it disappear off the screen.
All right.
Yeah.
So you can see from that there isn't a massive swing in rates collected from each ward. And part of that is because a lot of councils' rates are targeted rates, or set on a fixed basis. So all of the water services, as an example, are set on a fixed basis, so aren't impacted by the change from land value to capital value. And it's just the general rate and the local works and services. That local works and services, obviously, in changing the basis of that rate, there is no impact on the rates between wards, because that funding is ring-fenced to each ward. So it's only the general rate which there is some relatively minor level of change in distribution across the district as a whole.
Yeah, and you'll be able to see from, thanks Peter, from this, that from looking at this, Whangamata sees the biggest decrease across that ward of around about 500,000, and Thames will see the largest increase of around 472,000, so still roughly 500,000. And the others will see much smaller increases and decreases than that. So yeah, as you say, Peter, there's not a lot of change.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. Next question. Option 3 refers to minor dwelling. Where does option 3 leave a property that has 2 units that are identical, not a major and minor dwelling?
So we would expect that property currently has 2 separately used parts on it, and under option 3, that would still be the case. So if they aren't a minor dwelling, they wouldn't qualify for that remission, so they would still receive those 2 charges and have to pay them in full. That is, unless any of the other provisions within that remissions policy apply, which the extract of the policy is included within the proposal document.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question. Family and friends, that's a trust-based system, right? It wouldn't be hard for someone to make financial gain off an additional dwelling, taking the money through a different avenue. How are we auditing this?
So every year, people who, if they want to apply for the remission on the second dwelling, they have to complete a signed declaration just to say that that they are renting it out for family and friends. Yes, I guess there is some trust in there. However, we do also have notifications through other systems, like we can look on Airbnb, and we do random audits of those remissions, the ones that are receiving the remissions. We do random audits across those to make sure that they aren't advertising those for for any monetary gain across any of the Airbnb or booking batch providers.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question here. I will benefit from a change to the remissions policy on second dwellings, but is there any intention to review the rates rules to make them more equitable, to include other ratepayers providing accommodation? For example, second dwellings over 50 square metres, or changes to include, for instance, bed and breakfasts?
So when this rating review was undertaken, and Donna showed the list of scenarios that were considered, a move away from rating on the basis of separately used or inhabited parts, which would entail a move to setting those fixed rates on the base of a rating unit instead, was something that was looked at, but it wasn't taken further, as it wasn't going to achieve those principles that had been set out when council looked to undertake this rating review in the first place. So that's something future council could consider, but at this stage is not part of this rating review.
Thank you, Peter. Next question. What impact do your options have on driving people to remove biodiversity?
Not sure. I'm not sure what's meant by that question, Amy.
No worries. So if the person who asked that question, if they want to provide a little more explanation in the comment section, feel free to do so. We can come back to that one. Awesome. Next question. In the past, have not been able to access TCDC web pages from overseas. That one I can provide answer to in the chat. Just a moment.
So I think the next one we can respond to is probably is a minor dwelling self-contained.
Thank you, Peter.
Donna, did you want to respond to that one?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So the question is a minor dwelling self-contained? So I think from memory.
Yeah, so again, when you say self-contained, I'm assuming that they're referring to having a bathroom that they therefore connected to the wastewater system, and also having a kitchen. As I explained with another similar question that was raised earlier, that the definition of a second dwelling is basically set in the rules throughout our building control rules. So that is about having a working kitchen or a working sink, as actually gives the definition of a second dwelling. A minor dwelling, it doesn't matter whether it's self-contained or not. It's about the size. So it's any dwelling under 50 square meters, or if it's a LifeMark approved dwelling under 60 square meters.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. Our next question from David. So David lives in Matatoki, and he's going to see a relatively significant increase from the current rates. Why is there such an increase rurally? Because there's less services out there.
So I guess this comes back to in the move from land value to capital value. So when Donna was talking earlier about rates as a tax, and they're quite a blunt tax at that. So there's only a few ways in which council can rate. So for these variable rates, it can be on the basis of land value, capital value, or annual value, which I don't believe any councils use today. And so when looking at the shift from land value to capital value, and this part is in the proposal document, it's the relativity between the two, so the 2-to-3 ratio or 150%. And so even if you are in a rural area that doesn't receive those services, if your capital value is relatively high, so above that 150% when compared to your land value, then you will see an increase under that move to a capital value rating system. So it's the general rate and the local works and services on where they're set on that variable basis, or that rate and the dollar basis, is they're not directly tied to a service received, and that's not what those rates fund. So it's your fixed rates, your water supply, your wastewater supply, which are tied directly to those services. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Peter. Will the rates remission present policy change substantially under the capital value rating?
So I can answer that one. So there are no plans at this point to change our rates remission policy, other than the changes that are proposed with this this review, which is really around the minor dwellings. The rates remission policy itself has to be reviewed every 6 years, and we will be reviewing that during the next financial year, ready to take effect with the next LTP. So, and with that, when we do review that rates remission policy, we'll take that out to consultation for feedback as well. But to answer the question whether there's any change from the rates remission policy from land value to capital value, that won't change anything or any of the policies in the rates remission policy. They'll still apply as they are.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Donna. Why do people that don't use the general rubbish bin, the red bin, have to subsidise those who do use it? That's a question from Anonymous.
So I can answer that one too. So with rates are set on for the targeted rates for services are set on the area of benefit or the area of service. So if your property is within that area of benefit or area of service, so for example, like with a curbside collection, if the trucks drive past your property and you're in the area to have that collection, then you will pay for it whether you use it or not. It's not rates are not a user pay system, so they're basically set on that area of service.
Awesome, thank you, Donna. Can you explain what a remission is?
So I can. I'll try and explain it quickly because there's a lot. So our remission policy has a number of remissions available in there, and council set remissions to give relief to ratepayers under certain circumstances, because rates are a tax on the value of property. There are some situations where council thinks it is equitable to be able to give remissions, and so remissions is basically providing some form of rates relief to a particular group of ratepayers or particular properties that meet the criteria under that policy to have a remission. I hope that makes sense.
And just to put it in a bit more layman's terms, think of them as something of a discount. So 50% remission is a 50% discount on the rates that would be payable on a property.
Awesome, thank you. That's nice and easy to understand, Peter. So what is the basic reasoning behind the change from land value to capital value? It's a great question.
Peter, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so if we come back to the underlying principles of what this review was intending to achieve, that's the affordability, fairness and equity. That's obviously challenging to achieve in a very blunt rating system. And so the underlying principle of a move from land value to capital value is that generally capital value will be a better indicator of one's ability to pay rates than land value alone. Now that's not to say that it's great or perfect or always is the case. I'm sure we can all think of examples where that's not, but in general, when considering the two, land value and capital value is a better indicator of ability to pay than land value.
Thank you, Peter. If the option of fixing the UAGC as a percentage of total rates is adopted, will the new UAGC likely be higher or lower proportion of the total rating charged on each property than currently? That one, Claire?
Yeah, yep. So the UAGC, just for those who don't know, there are certain rates which have a So certain rates that are set on a fixed uniform basis, such as the UAGC, there is a legislative cap of 30%, which applies to those rates. That is, we can't collect more than 30% of the total rates through those rating mechanisms. I believe at the moment it's around the 20% mark that those rates are for Thames Coromandel, and the exact percentage would be set through the annual plan process when that change comes into effect, if that's what's adopted. At this stage, we wouldn't be expecting any departure from that overall, but that's a decision for council to make when adopting and setting rates through that annual plan process.
Awesome, thank you, Peter. How are rates applied to tiny homes? Also, do those with tiny homes have to pay a fee towards sewage, etc.?
So I can probably look to address some of this. From a rating perspective, we will generally rate anything that we know about. And so tiny homes are no different if they are on the land, if they are connected to those services or have those services available. They will pay those, or they will be charged those rates. Obviously, the capital value on a tiny home will be different to a full-sized house, but that's really the only difference.
Fantastic, thank you, Peter. Why do you say it is currently land value based when only 2 are such and 6 factors and the heaviest rates are taken as SUIPs? Do we need a little bit more context on that one?
No, I think that's okay. So when we talk about land value or capital value or the basis of rates, we're mostly under the law, under the Local Government Rating Act or legislation, it's around what the basis of the general rate is. That's the main rate, I guess, that council needs to adopt a basis on which they're going to charge that, whether it's land value or capital value. And so that's why that applies to that rate, but it also applies to the local works and services rate, which in a way is like a general rate, but a general rate for that particular ward. So that's why that's sort of set on the same basis. In regards to the fixed rates, those rates are fixed for either if it's a fixed district-wide rate like any of the water rates or the rubbish and recycling fixed rate. That's because the way that the principles behind that is that people that are where that service is available are able to receive that service. So that's why everybody pays the same. There isn't a differentiation between that, or they pay that per SUIP. I'm not sure if that's answered the question totally, Peter. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just in terms of those principles that you were talking about, those are the principles in the Local Government Act section 1013 if anyone wants to go and have a look. So that's around who benefits from an activity of council, who exacerbates the costs, and there's about 5 considerations in there which council needs to take into consideration when it is setting rates. And so that's why for those activities where there is a direct connection, a direct use of service, the SUIP basis is quite a direct link between who is receiving the service or who is able to receive the service, and then therefore who should pay for that service. For some of the activities that are funded through the local works and services or the general rate, those that direct link may not be as strong or may not be there at all.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Peter and Donna. We've got 2 questions here that I think I will answer. And is this presentation being recorded? It definitely is, and we're going to post it to our rating review webpage following this. So if there's anything you want to go back and have a look at again, you can do so. Next question was, is there any clearer or simpler ways of explaining this kind of stuff? It's a great question. We do have a lot of collateral available on our website, including infographics and graphs that helps make it a lot easier to understand. Some of these questions are very unique, I think, and if you wanted a broader understanding, then that's definitely the place to go. www.tcdc.govt.nz/rating review. Awesome, thank you. According to new government legislation, a non-consented second dwelling is 70 metres squared. However, the current conversation refers to 50 to 60 metres squared. Will TCDC be moving to 70 metres squared?
So I guess I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on that coming up. I know there's new legislation coming in. What I can say about that is, if legislation does come in that affects the way that councils have to govern or rate or use it for building consents, then the answer to that would be yes. That it would change to that. So it would depending on whether there is any changes to the minor dwelling size. That's something that we would look at with the change in legislation. And yes, if it did affect it, then that would definitely change.
Awesome, thank you, Donna. We've got a question here from someone who lives in the Kowaironga Valley. They said that they have checked their property and a few properties near them, and they're seeing some pretty major increases. It is half proposed rates rises are about 25%. Just asking about the land value and whether or not it could be changed between when this happens next year and now.
So for properties that there's going to be some properties that are going to see quite a big or substantial increase. For those properties, there is consideration that will be given to a transition period for getting up to the new rate. That will be a remission. That will be in our rates remission policy that we will consult on in the next financial year, which will be before any proposed changes to the rating review comes into effect. So if council does adopt the proposal to go from land value to capital value, then there will be a transition process for those properties that are outliers who are receiving substantial increases. Not sure that answers the question or not. I hope so. Peter, did you have anything else to say for that one?
No, other than that, when the next annual plan process happens under the capital value system, if that's what council adopts as a result of this rating review, then that's obviously something that the council consider in the future if there are some, substantial or outsized impacts on specific properties. We didn't want to put that forward as part of this proposal because it assumes a number of outcomes, and there's also a lot of work that may or may not be necessary depending on what happens.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Awesome. Cheers, guys. We have had a few people asking, what is a SUIP? I have provided a full explanation. Yep. Yeah, in the in the comments. But if you could, guys, maybe give us a quick overview.
Okay, so a SUIP is a short for separately used or inhabited part of a rating unit. So basically what that means is every rating unit or every property in the district has one sewer. Those that have more than one dwelling on that property, or when I say dwelling, I'm talking about habitable units. So that's a unit that meets the criteria of a second dwelling. They will pay an additional separately used or inhabited part of a rating unit on some of the rates, on some of the fixed rates, like the targeted rates that Peter was referring to earlier, and also on the UAGC. So yeah, so basically they will pay, there's certain rates that will pay, if they've got 2 SUIPs, will pay 2 lots of that particular rate.
So just to add to that, the consideration of dwelling and minor dwellings is when we're talking about residential uses. It gets a little bit more complicated when we're looking at commercial use, and so if you've got many different uses within a building or a property, that's where you can have separate or additional SUIPs without different numbers of dwellings. And so that's where, if you're interested in that, have a detailed look at the policy and the section of the long-term plan which talks about what is a SUIP, which is close to the page numbers that were referenced earlier, I think around the 250, 254 of the long-term plan.
Thank you, guys.
If I can get to it. Oh no, I've gone the wrong way, sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was around page 254, I think, to 259 of the long-term plan.
Cool. Thank you very much, Donna and Peter. We only have a couple of minutes left, guys, so we'll try to get through a few more questions. If you have asked a question and it wasn't answered, or it wasn't answered adequately in this Q&A, feel free to pop it into an email, send it to ratingreview@tcdc.govt.nz, and we'll be able to come back to you personally. Thank you. All right, let's have a look through. If a property receives a substantial increase in rates, will there be backdated claims?
Short answer is, if the increase is from this, no. The proposal here is to change the base on which council is setting rates and setting those rates moving forward. So it wouldn't involve any sort of retrospective recalculation of rates.
Awesome, thank you, Peter. Let's have a look through the remaining questions. What does Local Works and Services Mercury Bay Residential mean?
So that's just the Local Works and Services rate, which has a number of different components, and you'll see on those pages in the long-term plan may be differentiated or set differently depending on the category that it is levied on. Many of those differentials applied to each category is one. For some of those rates, they were more differentiated at one point in time. So the Local Works and Services Mercury Bay Residential is the targeted rate for the local works and services that a residential property in Mercury Bay receives.
Yeah, which are all the community spaces activities. So that rate funds all things like parks and reserves, halls, libraries. Trying to think what else there is in Mercury Bay. Someone help me out here. It's just all those locally funded. It's all the locally funded activities in Mercury Bay are funded by that Local Works and Services rate.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Donna and Peter. I think we will call it there. And as I said before, if your question hasn't been answered, you think of anything else while you're marinating on what you've heard or rewatching the video that'll be available on our website, you can feel free to send it through your question to ratingreview@tcdc.govt.nz.
Right, kia ora. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you. Have a good
Thank you
evening.
all.